The Debrief with Jared Hudson is a dynamic podcast hosted by former U.S. Navy SEAL Jared Hudson. Join him as he sits down with captivating guests to dive into a variety of topics, offering insightful conversations and unique perspectives. From military experiences to current affairs, each episode promises to bring the truth about the world around us.
All right, well, good to see you here, Congressman Palmer. Appreciate you taking time to come in and hang out with me a little bit. So just quick background for the listeners on how I got to know you. I got to know you a couple years ago now, right? Almost 2 years ago. We didn't really know each other. I knew of you. You were my congressman. I voted for you before and ran a campaign in Jefferson County, lost the campaign for sheriff, but through people I met politically, they were able to put me in touch with you. As a matter of fact, he has a radio show, Phil Williams. He was the one who originally put me in touch with you. And so we met, actually went up to D.C. to see some buddies up there and met with you, and you gave me the tour of D.C., and we kind of became friends ever since. Now we get to hunt together. My daughter killed her first deer on your property last year. So that's so we kind of built a friendship over the years, and I appreciate you being on here to sit down, chat with us, interview for a little bit, especially with all that's going on in the world and all that's going on with you right now in politics. The one other thing I want to cover, you just finished a primary in our district, District 6, and you had two Republican contenders, but tell me if I'm wrong, you won the Republican primary for this district with 83% of the vote. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's...
Yeah, so with 83% of the vote, I mean, hands down, the people, at least in the district, and we'll talk a little bit about it in a few minutes, kind of how the districts have changed a little bit, but they hands down decided that, hey, this is our congressman, this is who needs to be our congressman, because let's face it, you have a Democrat opponent, but with that being said, in the state of Alabama, District 6, you're probably going to win the slot in November, but you still do have an election coming up in November.
I do. The primary was concerning to me because I've lost so much of the district through redistricting, and I'm sure your listeners are aware that the courts got involved in our district lines, wanted to draw a minority district I think to try to enhance the opportunity to have another black member of Congress. I think what it was about was an effort orchestrated by President Obama and Eric Holder to get another Democrat from Alabama. And the only way they could do it is to manipulate the district lines. But the way it impacted me, I lost most of Jefferson County. I only have about 20% of Jefferson County. Lost all of Blount County, which was a very strong county for me.
How much of Jefferson County did you have beforehand?
About half.
Okay, so it was about 50-50 between you and the Democrat congressman, we ever say Terry Sewell. She had the other half.
Right.
Now she has 70-ish% of Jefferson County?
Maybe 80%.
Okay.
It's a lot.
And you lost Blount County completely.
Yeah, lost most of Homewood. Lost Hoover west of the Walmart over on Highway 150.
Mm-hmm.
Hoover High School, the Hoover Met.
Is that
some subdivisions, whatever west of there in Jefferson County.
The golf course, all that area over there, Ross Bridge, that area?
Yeah, I lost.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, but I picked up Autaga, Elmore, Coosa, and a little bit of Talladega County, and so we calculated it's 100-something thousand voters probably that we lost, and picked up 100. About the same number of new people, and obviously I'd never campaigned in those new counties except Coosa. I had Coosa early on. So
you've been doing this for 4 terms. This will be your 5th. Is that correct? So you've been doing this in this same area for a while. Then all of a sudden, 5th term into it, now it's almost like you got to start over and re-campaign to people that don't necessarily know Congressman Gary Palmer.
Well, you do, and so you're meeting a lot of new people, and I really hate losing the folks that I had, because one of the first things I did when I got elected started hosting a quarterly lunch for all the mayors in the district, so I could get to know them, and so they could get to know each other. That's one of the things I found out pretty quick is that a lot of the local guys don't know each other. And it has really been a blessing. It's been great building these relationships. Now I've got a geographically much longer district, but we're going to continue to have these lunches for the mayors. I'm going to have to maybe try to figure out a more central location or vary, but it's going to be more difficult to get these guys to drive in for this. But hopefully once a quarter they'll see the value in it. And then I've got to spend a good bit of time getting to know folks. I've agreed to speak to the Sunrise Rotary Club for Prattville and Millbrook. So it's a 7 o'clock club, but I'm going to have to drive
an hour to get there.
Drive an hour and 15 minutes to get there. So, but that's part of it. And one of the things I really enjoy about being a member of Congress is I love finding out what people do and how they do it. And we've got some remarkably talented people throughout the state of Alabama, but in our district in particular. And one of the things I did is I went down to Tallahassee, which, if you've never been there, it's really a pretty town. It sits up on a bluff overlooking a lake and a big old dam that was probably built 100 years ago. But there's a little coffee shop there that's really an automobile shop, classic automobiles. So the decor is basically classic automobiles, and they're turning it into a little coffee shop and an auto shop. So it's fascinating to see what all people do and
that's
how they
in your
live.
district. That's a new addition to your district,
Yeah, it
correct?
will be part of the district come January 3rd.
Okay.
But they vote in November, even though they're not officially part of the district yet. It's
So
kind
with the
of weird.
primary that we just had a couple months ago, however long ago, and with the upcoming presidential election, your new district is voting for you, even though they haven't
I'm not yet their
shifted the
representative.
district line. I
Right.
got you. Wow, that's
Barry Moore still represents it.
I got you.
I had a lady call me and say, the word down here is the only time you show up is when you want our vote. I said, well, ma'am, you may not be aware of this, but I've never represented you. So this is my first time to actually campaign in your district.
It's the first time I've needed your vote.
Yeah, first time I was eligible for your vote.
Yeah, that's right.
So, but she decided that she liked me, and it worked out. My numbers were really high in Autauga and Elmore County, and
That's good.
and I relate to a lot of those folks because I'm a rural guy. I know I live in Hoover now, but I grew up in Hackleburg, Alabama. So I'm you can take the
from
boy
the
out of the
country.
country, but you can't take the country out of
There
the
you
boy
go.
kind of guy.
Well, that's a great segue. Kind of started off into it. That's a segue into how I really like to start. Just a quick background or quick bio of who you are, where you're from, because obviously we know you as Congressman Palmer. At least I know you that, and a lot of viewers will. But where'd you come from? Quick bio behind it. What you did previous to Congress, because you're not a career politician, right? You've been in there. Again, this will be your 5th term. After the November election, what did you do beforehand that kind of led you to the position of a congressman?
Well, I grew up in northwest Alabama, a little town called Hackleburg, pretty much dirt poor. My dad, who was a very smart guy, but he only had about an 8th grade education, was a logger. He built the house I grew up in. He only finished what he could pay for, so my brother and I shared a bedroom that had cardboard between the 2 floors. He ran out of sheetrock money to buy sheetrock, and didn't have any interior doors, didn't have indoor plumbing for a little while, at least in terms of bathroom. And he finally added all that. He had a truck and a pair of mules. And in the summertime, after I finished 1st grade, I've got a brother a year and a half younger than me. We went to the woods with our dad and learned to skid logs with mules. I'm the first person in the family on either side of the immediate family to go to college. But after I went, both my brothers went, my sister went. My mom had finished high school and had always wanted to be a nurse. And she had me 7 days before she turned 20 years old. So she had to put those dreams on hold. My youngest brother's 12 years younger than me. He was the surprise of the family. But when the 3 older of us left home, mom went to college and got a degree in nursing. And first got an associate's degree and then went back and got a BS. So
Now what's your degree and what's your education?
my degree is in operations management, which is basically industrial engineering through the business school. But I went to the University of Alabama, walked on the football team and made the team. My youngest brother's recruited all over. He played at Alabama and got a degree in civil engineering. He was one of the top civil engineers in the country. But it just, being the first to go to college changed the whole family. And I'll never forget this, Jared. I think I was in the 11th grade. Our science teacher who taught chemistry, physics, and biology was David Thomas. He was a World War II veteran, Pacific. He fought at Guadalcanal. And he walked up and stopped. He was walking through the classroom, and he stopped by my desk. I looked up at him, and he said, "Gary, you need to go to college." And nobody ever told me that. And so...
Was that even on your radar at that time until that man mentioned that to you?
Not really. My dad thought if you got a high school diploma, you were good. And my family we worked with our hands. My uncle, Dad was the oldest of 6 boys and 1 girl. The brother next to him had fought at the Battle of the Bulge, and he probably had finished high school, but he was a mail carrier and he built cabinets. And then the next brother was a home builder, and one of the other brothers, worked in mobile home plants or helped build houses. So we were very brown collar. Both grandpas farmed. I grew up picking cotton and pulling corn. I don't know if that means much to people here, but we grew our own food for the most part. Had a cow. Mama made butter. She had a churn.
Oh, wow, yeah.
Dad liked buttermilk. I never acquired a taste for it.
Yeah, I never
But
could.
I grew up on pinto beans and cornbread.
Yeah. I still like pinto beans and cornbread.
Oh, I do too.
The carbs don't like me much anymore, though.
Yeah.
Slow down on it. But, all right, so you come from a country home, country family, no real prospects all the way through high school of going to college. But you go to college, you play ball at Alabama. I mean, that's a big thing. One of the guys that works with us, Mike Reebles, he played ball at Alabama for a short time, walked on. He wound up leaving and finished out his career at Sanford, or when he finished his degree up here at Sanford. But that's a feat in and of itself.
Did Reebles walk on at Auburn or Alabama?
Alabama. He walked on in Alabama.
He kind of bucked the rest of the family.
Yeah, he did, because a lot of them are
sheep.
Auburn folks. Well, one of his brothers might have walked on at Auburn. Now that you mention
Chris.
it, Chris might have walked on at Auburn. I don't know if he played or not, but if he did, that's where
I
he
think
went
both
to.
of them did, Eric and Chris, but I'm not sure.
But Mike walked on in Alabama and then came back here and played at Sanford. But that's a feat to be a not just a roll tider, but one that played ball.
Well, the way that came about, my dad wouldn't let me play football in high school. I played baseball, and I was scouted in baseball. I was honestly, with all due modesty, really good as an outfielder. And so I didn't have the money to go straight to Alabama, so I went to a community college. And they had a volleyball team and had tryouts, so I tried out for the volleyball team and made the team, wound up starting. And I never played volleyball competitively. And the coach had played football at Auburn, thought I was a good enough athlete that I could play football. At Alabama, he didn't know I'd never played.
You just tried out for volleyball just to play sports in college. You just the athletic.
I'm better than volleyball.
I got you. All right.
So he didn't know I hadn't played football at all, but he thought I was a good enough athlete. So I hit the weight room and worked out and walked on down at Alabama. And as a wide receiver, is the only position where I thought I could play without having to know all the technical aspects of everything else. You can either run and catch or you can't. And I figured this will either work out or it'll be over pretty quick. And the first 3 weeks of practice, I had a really good fall. And we're getting ready to play Georgia Tech in a JV game. And the coaches wanted me to play, and I had to meet with Coach Bryant. So
you played under Coach Bryant.
Right.
That's pretty cool.
So I go to his office, And I'm sitting outside his office with a secretary lady named Linda Knowles, who I still know. I love Linda. And he's on the phone with Darrell Royal, the head coach of Texas. I can hear him talking to him on the phone. He calls me in, and he had this big old red leather sofa that didn't have any legs on it. And I'm not exaggerating, but the desk was eye level to me. I felt like I was 6 years old. And Coach Bryant's 6'4". He's a big guy. And he starts talking to me and, telling me what they needed, what they expected. And then he leaned up on his elbows on his desk and he said, "Gary, you've worked hard. You've done a good job for us." He said, I'm not going to guarantee you're going to get in the game, but I'm going to dress you." And he wrapped it up, stood up, shook my hand, put his hand on my shoulder, and walked me out in the hall. And I got in the game. First football game I ever played in was against Georgia Tech.
That's really cool. So you go to college, you play ball for Bear Bryant, right? So that's another kind of amazing thing. Everybody knows who Bear Bryant is, right? And that's you actually got to play for him. You play ball, you graduate school, and then what do you get into after that?
Well, one last thing about football at Alabama. Paul Bryant Jr. was an early supporter of mine when I ran for Congress, and he was talking to me about that game. And Alabama,
Georgia Tech game?
Yeah, Alabama and Georgia Tech used to play every year. And then they had an incident in the 60s where an Alabama player broke the jaw of a Georgia Tech All-American. And Bobby Dodd thought he did it on purpose and wanted Coach Bryant to punish the guy. And Coach Bryant wouldn't do it, so they quit playing. And they decided that they were trying to reestablish that game, and the first opportunity to do it was this JV game. I had no idea at the time of the significance of it. And this is Paul Bryant Jr. telling me this.
Years later.
Yeah, 40 years later.
Wow.
So not 38 years later maybe, but it was quite an experience.
Yeah.
To be part of that, even though I had no idea at the time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's funny how those things work, right?
Yeah.
And so you do that, and you move on to the next step in your life. Where are you at now? You leave college.
Well, I went back home to Hackleburg and worked with my dad for a little while, and then I moved to Birmingham in 1978 and worked for a food brokerage company for a wonderful, godly man who literally became like a second dad to me. Just a guy named Tom Bradford. And I left there and went to work for combustion engineering, which was more suited for what I was trained to do, and worked for them. And then I got a call from a guy I knew in college who worked for Rust Engineering, and just called me out of the blue and said, "Would you be interested in coming to work for us?" And so I went over and interviewed, and they hired me, and I really enjoyed working in engineering, particularly at Rust, because I like problem solving. I like to build things, and this is just in my sweet spot. And I tell people I'm a nerd. I like researching things and doing problem solving. That's fun to me, which probably explains why I don't have much of a social life. But it was a great fit. And then I decided I wanted to go to seminary. I never felt called to the ministry, but I just like the academics. Again, I'm kind of an odd duck, and I love history, and I wanted to just really immerse myself in the study of Scripture through seminary.
Now, was that, real quick, Mr. Bradford that you mentioned, is that the Mr. Bradford, the National Christian Foundation over in Mountain Brook, the same
Right.
Mr. Bradford? Okay,
Yeah,
so
same
now was he involved in the ministry at that time in his life? Did he you say he kind of became a second father figure, did that kind of drive you to that possibly? Or?
Well, I'd worked for Rust for, I think, maybe 6 or 7 years. I don't know exactly, but actually it was probably 8 years. And I was at work one morning listening to Focus on the Family, James Dobson.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the broadcast, he talked about having a conference that had been a dream of his. You know, he was a Christian psychologist, child psychologist, and he had always wanted to host a conference of Christian counselors. And to qualify, you either had to be a minister who counseled in postgraduate school in counseling or a certified counselor. And I didn't meet any of the criteria, and he was taking applications from all over the country, and he was only going to accept 25. So when the program ended, I was already at work. I just turned the radio off at my desk and went back to work. And a little bit, the phone rang. It was my wife. She said, "Did you hear the broadcast?" And I said, "Yes, I did." She said, "Are you going to apply?" I said, "No, I'm not." She said, "Why not?" I said, "Well, first of all, it's a program for counselors, and I don't meet any of the criteria. I mean, I work for an engineering company. I might need counseling, but I don't know anything about it. And second, he's only taken 25 people from all over the country, and I wouldn't have a rat's chance." And my wife is very straightforward. She just said, "Well, you've been praying for God to open a door. Don't you think you could open that one?" And so I called them. They mailed me an application. This is all pre-email. And it literally lay in my briefcase for about 2 weeks. And I finally, out of guilt, filled it out and mailed it in. The head of the program called and talked to me for about 45 minutes after they'd reviewed my application. And 3 weeks to the day later, Jared, I got a letter saying I'd been accepted.
Wow.
And I lay awake all night. And that's no exaggeration, because I knew two things. I knew God was in it, and I knew I was going to have to make a decision between keeping my job and going out there. And my wife used to tell me that I would never quit my job because I was so afraid of being poor again. And so I struggled with what to do. We just had our first child, and fortunately Ann was still working at the time, but Focus was calling saying, "You got to make a decision." They had a waiting list, and we're sitting in our living room one Sunday night after church, and she looked at me and said, "Well, what's our purpose?" And this is long before Rick Warren ever wrote his book.
Mm-hmm.
And I gave what I thought was a weak answer. I said, "Well, it's to help people." She said, "Well, if going out there led one person to Christ or saved one marriage, would it be worth it?" And I turned in my resignation the next day.
So she drove you to do this. And a lot of times our wives, I know my wife keeps me in check all the time, right? But
Yeah.
she drove you to do this thing that seemed a little bit crazy and outside the norm.
Yeah. Here's the thing that I would say to most people, that they think they might could do something, they think they might have the gift for something, is you got to listen to other people, because other people see in you what you don't see in yourself. And Ann always saw in me more than I saw in myself. And she also believed that there was more to life than just making money. And so she was willing to give up my salary in engineering to go do something that we didn't know how it would come out. So I went out there. It was a 4-week program. And the last week I was there, one of the Focus vice presidents, a guy named Tom Menery, stopped me in the hall. And he said, "You're from Alabama, aren't you?" And I said, "Yes, sir." And he said, "Well, we need some contacts." And I thought it was for fundraising. So he introduced me to the guy who represented this region, a guy named Randy Hicks. And we set up a meeting, and I'm sitting in there in the meeting talking with Randy and giving him some names. And I said, "Randy, this is when Focus was still in Pomona, California." I said, "You guys are here ministering to people who are 2,000 miles away." I said, "Have you ever thought about setting up state-based or region-based extension of Focus, be closer to the people?" And he looked up and said, "You've been reading our notes." And he told me how they were setting up family policy councils to impact state legislatures.
Wow.
And I knew immediately that's why I was there. That was the last day I was there. I flew home the next day, which was a Saturday, called them that following Monday, told them I wasn't qualified to lead it, but I'd help them start it. And Tom Bradford was the first guy I went to see. We were incorporated 6 weeks later.
You already had the relationship.
Already had the relationship. And I just felt like if God's in this, Tom Bradford will be in it. And he became our first board chairman. And It's, as he would say, it's been a great ride. We, within a year, they made me the president. Within a year and a half or 2 years, we were the model organization. A little bit after that, I got a call from a lady at Heritage Foundation asking me if I'd be willing to come to a meeting in Colorado Springs. And interestingly enough, Focus was moving to Colorado Springs. And it was hosted by former Secretary of Education, William Bennett. And I went out there and found out that they were setting up a national network of conservative state-based think tanks. And long story short, they elected me to the board. And we agreed to serve 3 2-year terms. And my last 2-year term, they elected me chairman of the board. And when we started, we could have all met in one conference room. When I left, our annual meeting was attracting 1,500 people.
Wow.
It was in Oklahoma City, in the Oklahoma City Convention Center, where the Oklahoma City Thunder the NBA team plays basketball. And people were coming from all over the world. We've now got 65 of these state-based groups. Combined budgets are somewhere close to $350 million.
Holy cow.
So we were pretty successful with
You were
that.
at the start of that and
Yeah, I
the
was on the
growth
front.
of it and kind of had the foundation, a plank owner, for lack of a better word. That's what we call them.
I was on the founding board.
That's cool.
And so, but prior to starting what started out the Alabama Family Alliance, it's now the Alabama Policy Institute, Jared, I'd never even been to our state capitol. I mean, since I was at the moment successfully unemployed, in that 6-week interim before we actually got incorporated, I just went to the library and immersed myself in policy. And I was getting stuff from Gary Bauer and from all these different groups that I didn't even know existed until this came about, and started reading. I read Chuck Colson's Kingdoms and Conflict. I read his book Against the Night, which was a fabulous book. I bought it by the case and gave it to people. And that's how this whole thing started. And I did that from 1989 to into 2014.
And so that mindset, I guess you had, right? That mindset to look at problems, fix things. You love digging into stuff and researching. You didn't see it, but God opened the door, I guess, for you to step into the think tank, the policy stuff with API and everything that you did. And it was all through, I hate to say a random open door, because nothing's random by God, but not something that you pushed open, just something that God put in front of you.
Yeah, and really all of us need somebody that sees something in us that we don't and will push us out to do it. I've been asked, well, what were you thinking about walking on the football team? And I was thinking, first of all, that I wanted to know if I had what it took, but I also didn't want to be someone that wakes up in their 40s or 50s and regret not trying.
Yeah.
Now, I think that most people are risk averse, and I think that that's not a good way to live. I think you need to be willing to take reasonable risk. I mean, I was a good athlete, so there was some reasonable expectation that I could be successful, but it still was very demanding. And somebody asked me today, well, what was the best thing about it? And it was learning resilience and perseverance, but also learning to deal with disappointment. Because but that's one of the best things about sports anyway, is you're not going to win every game. Sometimes you're not going to be the best at any of it, but the thing that you should get out of it is you never want to get outworked. And that's what one of the coaches told me. He said they had a lot of players that were better than me, but nobody worked harder. That's what we need in our culture now, is people willing to step out and take a risk, work like they've never worked before, learn to accept disappointment, but persevere. You don't quit. You don't give up. And we're a very risk-averse culture now.
I love that though. Yeah, you might beat me, but you're not going to outwork me.
Exactly.
I like that.
Exactly.
That's good.
And
So think tank. Now you say you kind of immersed yourself in learning policy, starting to learn politics, right? More at the Montgomery level, I would assume, right? You're dealing a lot with the state of Alabama. Did you deal much with the federal side or the D.C. side during that time?
I did. A number of people had gotten to know me here in Alabama. We really exceeded everybody's expectations.
API did?
Yeah.
Okay.
And, well, at this time we were the Alabama Family Alliance, but I got a call asking me if I would help out with a Supreme Court nominee, a guy named Clarence Thomas.
Oh, wow.
And I was also a good writer. I wrote a column about Thomas that was published in papers in other states. It kind of went national. And so the very first work I ever did with Washington was with Clarence Thomas. And when he was...
What year was that?
1991.
Okay. All right.
George H.W. Bush. And when he was finally confirmed, after all we went through with the Anita Hill mess, I was invited to the White House for a swearing in. And that was my first time to the White House. And then I was asked for input on judicial nominees pretty much thereafter up until I got elected to Congress. I think the last one that I was involved in was either Alana Kagan or Sotomayor, whichever one of them was the last one.
So how do you even how did somebody even look and say, hey, we got, Gary Palmer over here with his think tank, we need to talk with him about our Supreme Court nominee. How do you even get involved in it? Was it because of your columns? Was it because of other connections, or?
I really hadn't gotten widely known with the columns. Later, probably, I forget what year it was, maybe 97, 98, I spent 16 years writing a weekly column right up until I got elected to Congress. So it was probably 98. But just work that we'd done and how quickly we had emerged as a force for good in Alabama. We'd done a number of things. And one of the things that I learned from my business experience is that, particularly as a founder, you cannot do everything. Every objective is going to be impacted by three things. It's going to be impacted by capacity, and that includes competency, resources, and time. And I learned that from a guy named Bob Bill, who was on the board at Focus. So if you've got the objective is to move a huge pile of dirt, and you want to hire me to do it, and you don't care how long it takes, I could do it with a wheelbarrow and a shovel. It might take me 2 years. But if you want it done by the end of the week, then I've got to be able to get a front-end loader and some dump trucks and people to operate them. Well, that requires resources. So your capacity is largely determined by the resources to impact the time element of it. So I knew that I couldn't be the fundraiser, I couldn't be the policy paper writer, and I couldn't be the guy in Montgomery and this ever get off the ground. So I focused on raising the money and hiring the people that could do these other things. And then when we got started like that, and I hired a couple of really good people, that really launched us. And then eventually we built up enough capacity where I could do more of the writing, but I was really the guy laying the framework for what we were going to do in any given year. And that's what I've tried to teach other folks who are trying to start similar organizations is, you will burn out in a hurry.
Yeah, you will.
And I had a guy in Mobile, a very good friend of mine, told me one time, he said, Gary, if people figure out you'll do it all, they'll let you.
That's right.
So,
So you do that. Now you've got, and the reason I ask, go back one, the reason I ask specifically, like what got you involved in that, a lot of people don't understand this. I like saying this because for the listeners that hear, Proverbs says you find a man, I believe it's Proverbs or it might be Ecclesiastes, you could tell me if I'm wrong. You find a man good at his work and he'll serve before kings and not obscure men, and I see that with my life, right? I mean, I've been good at certain things in work, and I still teach for the SEAL teams, right? Pistol and carbine. I mean, that's because I'm good at that, or we're running operations for federal and state agencies. We're not serving before obscure men. So that's just kind of why I asked that. It was almost a loaded question because obviously you must have been good at your work. You must have been good at what you immersed yourself in with everything you did. And then with API, and even what API is now, I mean, you've been gone from it for some time, and there's still quite the think tank, for lack of a better word. You built that foundation. You were obviously good at your work. Otherwise, you wouldn't have been asked to help confirm Supreme Court nominees. And I don't think the organization would be what it is now if it wasn't for that front end work. So that's why I mentioned that, because it's kind of a loaded question. But I think it's important for people to understand there was a lot of effort that went into it on the front end. It wasn't just like, oh yeah, we'll just ask Gary Palmer what he thinks. No, there was a reason that you were asked what you think.
I was asked to be on a radio talk show host that Hank Irwin hosted. And some of your listeners may remember Hank Irwin. He had a radio show, and he's also a state senator. His sons, the Irwin brothers, are the ones who did I Can Only Imagine, the movie about Bart Millard, the lead singer for Mercy Me, and several other movies. They're really good at their craft. But I was on with Hank, and this lady called in and started talking about what her child came home from school and told her about the environment. And it was really big exaggerations. And having worked, first engineering company I worked for was Combustion Engineering in the Environmental Systems Division. And I started answering these questions. She said, well, do you have anything that I can use to learn about this? And I said, well, and I'd actually run into a lady in the gym where I was working out who asked me, do you have anything you can give me on this? And I said, well, I've got, a couple of file cabinet drawers full of information. I thought, nobody's going to come over and go through, let me go through file cabinet drawers to give them stuff to read. So I contacted a couple of people about writing a book just for parents and teachers. And so we got a book written called Facts Not Fear. I did all of the editing of every chapter. We also had top scientists, top economists review each chapter before we'd release it for publication. And that book made the front page of the New York Times, the Washington Post. It was featured on headline news on CNN all day on Earth Day in 1997. It went into 9 printings, Jared.
Wow.
That's a little bunch of rednecks in Alabama. And I was told, I had agents in New York that pushed our book out for us, but I was told that it was the second best-selling trade book ever from a think tank. And it's just a little bitty, Alabama Policy Institute, Alabama Family Alliance kind of thing. So that really got us on, not only on the national map, but the international map. It was translated into Spanish. There's a Canadian edition. There's editions in other parts of the world that went into a second printing. Marilyn Quell wrote the foreword for the first one. I'd gotten to know Vice President Quell. And so we did some things that really made a splash, for lack of a better way to describe it. And got us on a lot of people's radar of what we were doing. And people started coming and saying, well, can you help us with this? And can you help us with that? And I was involved quite a bit with President George W. Bush's administration, worked on both tax cut bills and on energy and environment issues, and just got to be involved quite a bit in Washington, particularly on the Senate side. And then in 2013, we had our annual meeting out in Oklahoma City, and the guy who headed up the Oklahoma think tank out there had asked me to come speak to their Rotary Club, which they claimed was the world's largest we counterclaim that Birmingham is, but so I went out and the funny thing is I'm sitting at the head table with this guy and he said, "What are you going to talk about?" And I said, "Well, I'm going to talk about energy. I'm going to talk about health care and Hillary Clinton." He said, "Oh, don't do that. We try to stay away from politics." He said, "Why don't you talk about history?" He said, "I love it when you talk about history." And I mean, they're about to read my bio for me to get up and speak.
You're about to walk on.
Yeah. So I got up and talked about leadership and the cost of leadership. And they wound up posting it on their website. I literally had people stop me on the street, tell me how much they enjoyed that talk. And I was asked to be on a panel at Devon Energy with the Attorney General of Oklahoma. I got a call from a TV station, asked me to come on and do a counterpoint with the Democrat minority leader in the Oklahoma legislature. And I said, "Why do you want me? I'm not in Oklahoma. It's the first time I'd ever been to Oklahoma." And they said, "No, we want you to come on." So I did that. People kept coming up to me and said, "Man, you need to run for Congress." And I said, "Well, I like my congressman, Spencer Backus." "Yeah, but man, you need to run for Congress." And I flew home on Friday, went to the woods.
It's a good place to go.
And then Sunday, I was getting ready for bed. My wife was already in bed. I just couldn't get it off my mind. So I went in my closet and to pray about it. And I said, "Lord, I don't want to run for Congress. I don't want to be in Congress. I don't want to be in Washington." I said, "But I didn't want to quit my engineering job to do this, but it's worked out. So I'll go where you want me to go and I'll do what you want me to do, but I need a sign." And next morning, I'm up, I'm shaving, I get a text message. Finished shaving, went on, picked up my phone, and the message was Spencer Backus just announced he's not running again. It was that quick.
Wow.
And
Talk about throwing that fleece out there and wanting God to make it wet or keep it dry. That is pretty quick.
so
Was that? It says literally the next
the
day.
next morning.
Wow.
It's no exaggeration at all. And it just so happened that same Monday, we were having the executive committee meeting. The executive committee of the Alabama Policy Institute met once a month, and it was that day. And that night was the Business Council of Alabama's annual dinner. This was late September 2013. And Luther Strange, who was Attorney General, came up to him and said, "Man, you got to run." And so initially I said I would. And for 2 weeks I went around and met with people, told them I was going to run. Then I had some meetings in Washington, and I went up there and I flew back on a Friday morning, absolutely determined that I was not going to run. And I've never been enamored with Washington. It held no attraction to me, really. And so I went in and saw Mr. Bradford, told Tom that I decided not to run. He was not happy, wanted me not to make an announcement, wanted me to pray about it over the weekend and come see him first thing Monday morning. And I went home after work, sat down at the kitchen table with my wife and told Ann that I'd decided not to run. And she looked at me and said, "You know, for years I've heard you say what's wrong with the country is you can't get good people to run. I've even heard you compare it to having to go to war." She said, "How can you expect somebody else to go if you won't?" And she said, "I know this is not what we want, but I don't think this is about what we want. I think it's about what we're supposed to do." And she said, "I think we're supposed to do this." And I was floored.
Almost the same conversation she had with you 30 years earlier with.
And she's never wanted to be in politics. She doesn't want to be out in the public. But I knew I had to do it. And 6 months before the primary, my name ID was 4%, and half the people thought they knew my name, thought I was a golfer.
That's Gary Palmer, yeah.
This was, I think, part of God's plan. And I made the runoff, and I won the runoff 25 years to the day after I'd left Focus on Family.
That's really
And Randy
cool.
Hicks, who I'd had that meeting with on that last day I was there, now runs a public policy group in Georgia. He and his wife came over to be with me on that day. So it was,
That's really cool. So we've got the front end bio of Gary Palmer before he's Congressman Palmer. And that's, from start to finish. One question I'd like to ask you, and we're going to cut to a quick break and then come back in and talk about where we're at now with you're in Congress. We've got stuff going on in Congress. We've got stuff going on all across the political spectrum. We want to talk about some of that. Do you see a shift, or have you seen a change in you, what you hold dear, what you hold to, from being, hey, regular Alabama guy, whether an athlete, whether working for a business, whether being the founder of a think tank of API, into running a campaign and now being a politician? Has Gary Palmer shifted at all across that spectrum? And if you have, where have you shifted, and where have you held firm to, I guess, if that makes sense?
I don't know that I've shifted. I think I've become more mature, which is just part of the aging process. Some men don't ever quite get there, and I'm blessed that. But the thing that I see is that I've learned not to grab hold of anything. And I literally had a freshman member sit down with me on the floor of the House one time. He said, "Gary, how do you handle all this?" He'd seen that I didn't let it bother me too much. And I didn't mind taking on leadership, running counter to some of the decisions that the speaker made at that time. And I said, well, this is something that I try to live by. I try to live not wanting anything. Because once people figure out what you want, it becomes a leverage point. And I said, so I've tried to learn to live not wanting anything. And I said, the second part of that is never take anything you can't let go of. And if you can do that, that'll enable you to make the hard decisions. The ones, I don't know how many of your listeners know this, but after I won the runoff, I had to go to Washington to meet with John Boehner, who was Speaker at the time. So we go in his office, and Boehner was a chain smoker. He immediately lit a cigarette. And I said, Mr. Speaker, before we get started, I need to tell you something right up front. I'm not going to vote for you for Speaker. And he blew out a big puff of smoke, and his left eyebrow arched up. And he said, well, I'm going to need your vote. And I said, no, sir, you're going to be the Speaker. I'm fully aware of the consequences of me telling you this. I said, what you need to understand is that I was in a 7-person primary in a very conservative district in one of the most conservative states in the country. And we were in a forum, and we were asked, would we vote for you for Speaker? And some of the other guys said no, so I said no. I said, so if the first thing I did when I got here is break my word to the constituents, I'd not only lose their confidence, but you'd immediately start to wonder at what point I'd break my word to you. And I said, I want you to understand right now, if I tell you I'll do something, you can absolutely count on it, and I'm going to prove it to you by not voting for you. And word kind of spread through D.C. about that. People thought I'd lost my mind. But 2 weeks later, he came up to me and gave me a check to support my campaign. And we had a really good relationship. But as a freshman, I was one of 31 that voted against the rule on a trade bill that I thought was wrong. And but the thing that I've always done is I've told them what I'm going to do before I do it. You shouldn't surprise people. If you're going to do something, have the guts to tell them up front. But then once you tell them, you got to have the guts to follow through. Because if you're not consistent, then you're lost. And so that's one of the things that bothers me about some of my colleagues is the lack of consistency. I had one guy stop me on the phone and he said, I believe God called me to be here. And I said, well, then vote like it. Because if God's called you to be here, you won't be here one day less than you're supposed to be. You won't be here one day longer. So
that's really good. That's good.
Well, that's true of any place you are, Jared.
The only shift you've seen is just maybe a level of maturity that each of these things has brought into your life. But for the most part, not one of these titles change who you are. You just have to put that hat on and go and do that job at that point in time.
Well, I also made a commitment. I don't want anybody to call me Congressman. My staff calls me Gary. My interns call me Gary. You don't ever want to feel entitled. You don't ever want to feel like you're better than anybody else. If you want to build a team, then you've got to be a team member. Now, you can be a team member and be a team leader. But you understand this from the craft you learned as a SEAL team member. You guys work together as a unit. Well, that's what I've tried to do with my staff. And I come home, I've got people, it really makes me uncomfortable, especially with people that have known me for a while, when they call me Congressman. So I've started telling people that there's two kind of people that call me Congressman. People who don't know me or people who want something, so you just decide what group you're in.
Yeah, that's right. Well, so speaking of calling you Congressman, we're going to go to a break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about your position as Congressman and some of the stuff you see going on and some of the stuff that's going on now, and then more importantly, the election that we have coming up. Obviously, you have an election, but the really precarious presidential election we have coming up in November. So we'll come back here in just a few minutes and finish this out.
This episode is sponsored by Covenant Rescue Group. Covenant Rescue Group is a nonprofit organization that combats human trafficking and child exploitation. They support operations globally leading to real rescues, real arrests, and real prosecutions. Foundational to this is funding the operations from the training to the rescue. They join their team with other organizations and law enforcement agencies providing resources and manpower needed to conduct successful anti-human trafficking operations. This includes undercover child exploitation stings and rescue operations that dynamically break up human trafficking rings. Visit www.covenantrescue.org to learn more and donate.
All right, so Congressman Palmer, we've talked about who Gary Palmer is, right? And not that you've necessarily changed when you put on the title of Congressman, but the work you do changes tremendously because, the few times I've been to D.C., it's a madhouse. Every time I see Coach Tuberville, right, our senator, he says, it's a zoo, man, it's a zoo, right? He says that to everybody, talks about it being a zoo. Some of my buddies that are in Congress from the SEAL teams, they say the same thing. They're like, man, it is a different world, right? So not that it necessarily changes you, but that title's different, the work's different, and that's what I want to talk about here and kind of walk through a 30,000-foot view of what we see going on, how the administrations that have been so contrasting each other, the Trump administration, now the Biden administration. I know you came in the tail end of Obama, but we're going to talk primarily 2016. We see Donald Trump elected going into office, and then we see 2020, all of the election stuff goes on, and Biden comes in, and now where we sit in 2024 with a presidential election coming up, with two of the most, I don't even know how to describe it. Like, I don't think anybody's seen an election like this, at least in my lifetime, maybe in yours. So we've got Trump and Biden. I mean, they're just 180 from each other almost. So I want to talk about a 30,000-foot overview on why this is important, but also why the things that are going on in the world impact us and what you see as a U.S. Congressman as the importance of what we need to do, not just as the 6th District of Alabama, but as the state of Alabama, as the nation of the United States of America, and then obviously as the world. And you said something interesting just now, and you almost want to put it on a T-shirt and sell it, right? I'll claim it as my own, right, so I can sell it. But you said the world is the room next door. And that's powerful because our neighbors impact our lives tremendously. We see that just where we live at, right?
Yeah.
So our neighbors being the world next door, that's really important. I want to talk kind of, again, a 30,000-foot overview of stuff that you've worked on, what we're involved in, and why these two administrations and who's running these administrations to support what you're doing in Congress and your colleagues are doing in Congress and what your colleagues in the Senate are doing, and why all that stuff's important. So without me dragging it on further, let's just get right into it. Presidential election. You've worked under President Trump. You've worked under President Biden. I hate to say under because it's not like the president's over you, but you've had to
work within those administrations.
Right. So President Trump's administration. Give me a quick rundown of what it's like or what it was like working with the president, with the Trump administration on anything. It doesn't have to be, foreign connections. It could be energy dependence, whatever it is. Just what was it like working with the Trump administration?
Well, I've told people this many times. I wish you could see the Trump that I would see in meetings at the White House. Most people, they know Trump from his rallies or from press conferences or what have you, political stump speeches and things like that. He's totally different in a meeting. He's a quick study. He asks great questions and he makes decisions. As I said, I was involved with President George H.W. Bush with the Clarence Thomas confirmation, but did a lot on policy with George W. Bush, and I was able to get some things done. But with Trump, you come in, you lay out a plan, he'll ask questions, and then he doesn't ask somebody to go out and do a poll. He makes up his mind. Is this good policy or is it not? And if he decides it's good, he says, do it.
So when you say it's a quick study, you're talking about you walk in, you lay a plan before him, hey, this is what we're looking at doing. He's able to run through that really quickly, process it the best he can. That's what you mean by quick study.
I'll give you an example on the health care bill in 2017. The President's Deputy Chief of Staff had called me, I think it was on a Monday night. I was still here in town. And it was actually, Ann and I were having dinner with some friends. And I told them what I wanted. I said, we need to have imposed work requirements on able-bodied adults with no children who are on Medicaid. And we need to block grant Medicaid to the states because we're sending out about $50 billion a year in improper payments just on Medicaid. And that's $50 billion, okay? And so, yeah. When we got back to Washington, we had a meeting just on the health care bill. The President's Deputy Chief of Staff was there. And again, I reiterated what I needed to have to support it. Well, I was on the Budget Committee, and the way we were going to pass health care was to get it attached to the budget through a process called reconciliation. And so you had to add it to the budget by vote in committee. And if 4 of us voted no, it wasn't going to happen, and I was the third no vote because it wasn't what I'd asked for wasn't in there. And maybe 10 minutes later, I get a call from the President's Deputy Chief of Staff, and it was not pleasant. I mean, he chewed me out pretty good. And he said, I thought we had an understanding. I said, no, you invited me to come over to eat pizza and go bowling, and I don't eat pizza and I don't bowl. I told you what I needed, and so he hung up, and we were still in, and it's called a markup when you're preparing a bill to come out of committee. So we're an hour and a half, 2 hours later, I get another call. They had just called votes, and it was the chief deputy whip for the Republicans. And he said, where are you? I said, well, I'm on my way over to the Capitol to vote. And he said, well, the President's Deputy Chief of Staff wants to see you. So I went to the floor and voted and walked in the cloakroom and walked up to him. He said, what do you want? I said, I told you. And he said, you got it. And Chief Deputy Whip was there. I said, is leadership on board? And he said, yes. So I went to Paul Ryan. He was Speaker. He said, we had to get the Congressional Budget Office to give us an estimate on the impact. We got all that done. I think I voted no around 10:30 in the morning, that morning. Around 9 o'clock that night, I get a call saying, we want to make sure this is what you want. The White House wants to confirm this. We confirmed it. I get another message saying, can you be at the White House at 9:30 in the morning? And Jared, around 10 o'clock, I'm sitting in the Oval Office with President Trump explaining what we need to do, and he said I'm in 100%. We'd been trying to get Medicaid block granted to the states for 25 years.
Wow.
And because I voted no, got everybody's attention, we got it done in 24 hours.
Wow.
And then eventually they had to pull the bill. And this, again, this is another example. I'm giving this an example of how Trump works. Because I sat in the Oval Office and said, this is why we need to do this. And he said, I'm in 100%. He said it made sense to him. So Paul Ryan pulled the bill, and I had offered an amendment to cover people with pre-existing conditions by setting up a guaranteed benefits pool, which would have lowered premiums in every age category, even to people between 60 and 65 years old, and would have provided reasonably priced health insurance to people who, had been diagnosed with cancer, heart disease, whatever. And so I brought that amendment to the White House, and we were working with an outside group to run the estimates on how it would impact things, and got the White House on board with it. So we had another meeting. This time in the cabinet room, there were a bunch of members of Congress in the meeting, and I'm trying to explain this, and I had a sheet of paper folded up in my pocket that had a bar chart on it. So I walk around the table and walk right up beside President Trump, laid it down, and I said, Mr. President, you see this high number here? That's what the general population of the state of Maine was paying for their health insurance. See this number down here? That's what they're paying now. That's the general population state of Maine. This middle number, that's adult non-smokers in New Hampshire next door. Same insurance company, they pay more for their health insurance than the people of the general population of Maine. And he looked at the Secretary of Health and Human Services and said, is that correct? And he said, yes, sir. And that's how we got it done.
Wow.
He makes a decision, but you've got to make the case.
From a guy that came from a think tank beforehand, and you kind of dealt in that world, beforehand, having to make educated but quick decisions, setting things up, and then sometimes maybe even slower, more deliberate decisions. But was that refreshing from what you experienced because you hadn't been in Congress that long at that point in time, right?
Less than 3 years, about 2.5 years.
Was that different from what you experienced when you first got there, in your first 2 years? Or
people, I had a reputation because I'd worked up there. A lot of them knew me. And, of course, when I told Boehner I wasn't going to vote for him, that kind of put me on everybody's radar. Mm-hmm. But the reason I knew about the having a plan to cover pre-existing conditions was because I had worked in the think tank world, and I knew what the state of Maine had done, and I knew the guy who put that plan together. So
that helped you. That previous life helped you formulate a good presentation for President Trump at that point in time, who's the type of guy that, wow, this is a good presentation, it makes sense, let's make it happen.
And it had been done before, and the interesting thing is it had been done in Wisconsin, Paul Ryan's home state. I just got the experts together that knew how to make it a national plan, and that's how we got it done, and that's what brought the bill back.
So Trump administration, when you were working with him, what you saw is if you could put together or present a good plan, he's going to make a decision on it relatively quickly. Whether it's a yes or no, it might depend on your plan, might depend on something else, but you're going to get an answer relatively quickly. Let's go to where you're at now dealing with the Biden administration. Have you even dealt with the Biden administration in that way? Or
I've talked to him a couple of times, but just superficial. He is surrounded by gatekeepers. They're not going to let him. The conversation I had with President Trump in the Oval Office would never happen with Biden.
Oh, okay.
Biden would have all these people around him and say, well, Mr. President, you can't do this, you can't do that. In some cases, they wouldn't even let him speak. They'd just...
So a decision's definitely not going to be made, no matter what your plan is.
It doesn't matter.
Wow.
Unless it's some left-wing crackpot thing, and that ain't going to come out of me.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So now so I guess that change a question here that is there even a point then, I guess, if you're dealing with that with the current executive branch of government, the current administration, is there even a point of trying to put a halfway decent plan together to put in front of them if it's going to be like that? Or
Well, what you have to do is you've got to push it through the House, and Mike Johnson, the new speaker, and I are very close. We knew each other before either one of us ever got elected through Focus on the Family. He worked for Alliance Defending Freedom as a constitutional lawyer defending Christians. And
he's out of Louisiana, correct?
Right. Yeah. And what I've told Mike is that we have to lay down markers for what we will do if we have a bigger majority in the House, have the Senate and the White House. So we've got to pass legislation. He has to go negotiate with the White House, with the president. But it's really an exercise in futility. He was at the White House with Biden, and he brought up the fact that Biden had signed executive orders to stop construction of new liquefied natural gas facilities and to stop have no increase in the amount of liquefied natural gas that we export. And so when Speaker Johnson brought that up, Biden said, I didn't do that. And Speaker Johnson said, Mr. President, you issued the order. No, I didn't do that, which has got us concerned now that he's signing stuff he doesn't even know what it is. And the impact on Europe has been pretty severe because when Russia cut back on the gas, when the war in Ukraine started, Germany realized that they can't power their country just with renewables, with solar or with turbines. And they started having to reopen their coal-fired plants, but they needed natural gas. Jared, they built 5 LNG platforms in 180 days.
Wow.
That, having worked for 2 engineering companies, that's remarkable. And as I commented, I spoke at a Global Energy Summit, and I said clearly they didn't have a permitting problem. This is one of those deals where necessity.
6 months to knock it out. Holy cow.
Yeah.
Yeah, they definitely have a permit.
It was design and build in 180 days.
So you have 2 distinctly different administrations that you've worked alongside, I guess, for lack of a better word. One, decision-maker administration, whether they make a decision that you want them to or not, they at least look at a plan, right? Donald Trump's going to look at a plan and decide if he thinks it's good or bad, which is kind of up your alley because that's what you're good at, reading through stuff and trying to put plans together and build plans and build a solid foundation, which takes us into what I know we've talked about some, just we go to lunch or whatever, or off to the side. So I don't want you talking a lot about it, but talk as much as you can about some of the plans you've put together and some of the things you've been working on for the Western Hemisphere Alliance, energy, independence, that doesn't just support us here in me in 6th District, of Alabama, but it supports our state, the nation, and ultimately the world, what we see going on in Europe right now. You just mentioned a little bit of that. Yeah. Can you talk some to that?
Yeah, I had gotten to know the former ambassador to the United Nations from Canada, a lady named Louise Blais, and we had become concerned about the fact that we're almost 100% reliant on China for critical minerals and rare earth elements.
We're almost 100% reliant on China.
Probably 80% on some of these, but 100% on some of the others. And we've got those critical minerals here. We've got those rare earth elements. We don't have all of them, but we have a lot of them here.
What do we use them for? What do we use rare earth elements for in those critical minerals? You're talking about, like, what would we? Rare
earth elements are used to make microchips and semiconductors, the stuff that makes your phone work, that makes the control panel on your washing machine work. They all contain rare earth elements and critical minerals.
So it's technology-based stuff.
Mm-hmm. You can't make a battery without lithium or carbon, graphite or cobalt. China controls about 70% of the cobalt mining.
Wow.
And so Ambassador Blais and I started talking about forming a North American compact between the United States and Canada to mine and refine what we need from rare earth elements and critical minerals, so to eliminate our dependence on China. And I have serious concerns that if we get into a war with China, say over Taiwan, 80% of our semiconductors and microchips come from Taiwan, 90% of the advanced ones. And if we wind up in a war with China, those facilities will not exist.
So how much, if we have, because I'm not versed on this at all, really, other than maybe the few of the conversations that we've had. So how many locations between us and Canada do we currently mine for any rare earth minerals, or do we even have anything going on?
We have some mining, but the largest deposit of cobalt in the United States is in northern Minnesota, and the Department of Interior just put it off limits to mining, shut down the mining there. One of the largest deposits of copper is the Pebble Mine in Alaska. They've now denied them a water permit, which is stopped mining there. This is insanity.
Where does most of where does most of the stuff that China's getting come from? Africa, sub-Saharan Africa, Congo?
Comes from sub-Saharan Africa. A lot of it's mined in the Democratic Republic of Congo with slave labor, by the way. They're getting lithium from South America, a lot of copper from South America.
So all over the world.
There's copper. The Democratic Republic of Congo has big copper reserves. So they're basically turning these sub-Saharan Africa and South American countries into vassal states. And,
so they're getting it from all over the world.
Yeah.
So the idea that we were just talking about this a little bit ago, the idea that the 6th District of Alabama is not, and I keep using that because that's your district. That's where you're the congressman. The congressman of the 6th District of Alabama should solely be stuck within the confines of this portion of Jefferson County, Shelby County, Coosa County, whatever it is that you have. That is, in my opinion, far from the truth when you're dealing at a national and an international level with a country that is providing 80% of what the 6th District of Alabama needs just to, my phone sits here and goes, we just need to work. Right? Is that a fair assessment?
Your automobiles,
right?
The avionics and the airplanes you might need to get on every once in a while. A lot of your medical equipment. We saw that with COVID, how dependent we were on China in our supply chain for medical equipment. So we're in a really bad place with this. And I've again, going back to Ambassador Blade, we were initially thinking this would be something that we'd have a North American compact with Canada and the United States to not only mine this, but to build the refineries to process this stuff into usable material. And what I found is there's not a single major refinery or processor in the Western Hemisphere. They're all in Asia.
Wow.
And they're all tied to China, either owned by China or some kind of a partnership that involves China. So I think from a national security perspective, and this is some of the stuff I've shared with President Trump's team, is this is a national security issue. And,
the minerals and the rare earth stuff is a national.
And energy. I gave a speech at the Global Energy Summit, and there were a bunch of European diplomats there. And I said, look, the war in Ukraine did not create the energy crisis. It exposed it. And I said it exposed something else. It exposed the fact that no nation should be reliant on an adversarial nation for something that's critical to its economy and national security is energy. And you had all these European nations thinking, well, we're just going to build wind farms and solar farms and have all of our power come from renewables. And they found out not only is it intermittent and it's not consistent, it doesn't work all the time, it's extremely expensive. And they've passed this cost on to the degree that 2 winters ago, I think it's either 61 or 63,000 people died in what was considered a fairly mild winter because they couldn't afford to adequately heat their homes. They didn't.
Wow.
They didn't freeze to death, but they were older with cardiovascular issues or respiratory issues, and they couldn't afford their groceries, their medicine, and their utility bills. So they dialed it down. And there's 17 times more people die from cold-related illnesses than heat.
Wow.
So they started figuring this out. But the point that I made to these European diplomats is I said, look, you may go 100% renewable and think you'll no longer be reliant on Russia, but you're going to be 100% reliant on China, and that's worse. And it's gotten people's attention. And so Ambassador Blade and I were really focused on this and looking for new opportunities. And I get an invitation to have dinner with the ambassador from Colombia, Juan Carlos Pinzon. And so I go over and I have this conversation with him, and he wanted to host a dinner and invite some other ambassadors to come. So I go to this dinner, and there are at least a dozen ambassadors from the Caribbean and from South and Central America, including the ambassador from El Salvador.
And you go to Colombia for this?
No, I go to the embassy in Washington.
Oh, okay.
Colombian
Then,
embassy.
okay. All right.
And when that was over, we had a pre-dinner meeting with the top general for the Colombian military, and our commander, SOCOM, Southern Command, and some other key people about this idea. And I go on the dinner. General Petraeus was there. The CIA was there, and I kind of laid this out, and I had people come up to me and say, "This is brilliant." So I called Ambassador Blayback and said, "We're no longer talking about a North American Compact. This is a Western Hemisphere alliance," and it's just taken off, Jared. I've had diplomats from Europe, from Eastern Europe, from Central Asia. I've had the ambassador from Azerbaijan in my office 4 times. Had a delegation from their parliament in my office. Had the vice prime minister of Romania in the office. They want to be a part of this effort on critical minerals. The president of Kosovo. I mean, I could go on down the list. All kind of contact in South America. I went down to Argentina for Javier Milei's inauguration, met with their vice president and their interior minister. People are starting to realize that China's not their friend, but at the same time, China's building stuff for them. And in November, Xi Jinping will be in Peru to cut the ribbon on a huge seaport that they built specifically to compete with our West Coast seaports. And they're planning a rail system from Chile to Mexico. We have made some enormous mistakes. And so I'm trying to get members of Congress to engage in Sub-Saharan Africa, in South America, in Central America, and the Caribbean, because they're starting to realize China's not their friend, but you got the Biden administration going down there trying to get them to take foreign aid grants from some of our foreign aid agencies, but they want them to implement diversity, equity, and inclusion programs.
That's
and they're
funny.
not going to do it.
I met with the, we were doing some work with the human trafficking stuff, the permanent secretary of, they call it the permanent secretary, I believe, of Zambia. And their biggest concern was they're like, hey, if we're going to work with you in this and work with your NGO on this, we don't want any of the DEI stuff, the transgender, the homosexuals, all that. I mean, a lot of that's against their law. It's like against their legislation, and it's against their values. And I said, and I was kind of confused. I was like, well, no, we're not pushing that. We're strictly here to teach you how to rescue kids from being trafficked. And I said, why are y'all so concerned with this? And he explained. They said that Kamala Harris. Now these are the words that they said. I don't know, but almost about 2 years ago, somewhere near the beginning of the administration or them taking office. They said Kamala Harris came over and met with them, and they had $8.5 billion worth of debt from China that you just said a lot of them are vassal states. Well, that's basically what they were. China's wanting them for the copper mines up in the copper belt. And they said that Kamala Harris came over and said, hey, we'll tote your $8.5 billion worth of debt. We'll deal with that. But you have to implement this DEI program, this legalize homosexual marriage, like this whole list of things, and that was almost disconcerting to see that this country in sub-Saharan Africa is having kids stolen out of it, having kids being labor trafficked and forced to work in copper mines.
No, it's not labor trafficking; it's slavery.
Well, and it's complete slavery, right? And as you see that going on, one of the things that surprised me is, hey, we'll help you with this, but we'll only help you with this if you embrace our ideology. Well, we wouldn't do that to a man in his house, right?
I've got the former ambassador from Guatemala has been to see me. I've lost count of how many times. He's a solid Christian. The people that are involved with him, they're strong Christians. I talked to John Maxwell, the guy who wrote the Leadership Bible, and a number of books on leadership. He says they're rock solid. The president of El Salvador, who was just reelected, Bukele, is a Palestinian Christian. He cracked down on crime there. He's locked up over 70,000 cartel members, gang members.
He's about to crush the cartels out down there.
The crime rate down there has dropped 92%.
Wow.
So they're wanting me to come down. They got a new president in Panama. They're wanting me to come meet him. I've been asked to meet with the president of Ecuador. They got huge problems with brownouts and blackouts in their power grid.
All this based primarily on what the Western Hemisphere Alliance
Yeah.
trying for that energy independence.
Well, we've got more oil and gas than we will ever use. We've got one formation out west that contains 3 trillion barrels of recoverable oil.
Wow.
That's 3 times what the entire world's used in the last 100 years. It's in a different type. It's more useful for making diesel, but we're just floating on oil, and the same thing with natural gas. Our gas reserves actually keep going up because of the technology that we use to extract it. We could almost collateralize our debt with our energy resources, not completely, and I wouldn't recommend it, but we need to be
What do you
looking
mean
at
collateralize our debt? You're talking about almost do away with the 32 or 34 trillion in debt that we're in,
Yeah.
almost completely wipe that out?
Well, hard assets are what you put up to collateralize any loan or any debt obligations that you have. And oil and natural gas and coal, for that matter, are hard assets. Rare earth minerals and critical minerals are hard assets. So what I'm telling my colleagues and telling the Trump team is look, we need to look at these emerging economies. Africa, by 2070, by some projections, will have 3 billion people on the continent.
Holy cow.
And there's 3 billion people right now in the world that, speaking generally, have access to less electricity than your refrigerator uses in a year.
Wow.
There's 800 million that have zero access. And this is where China comes in and takes advantage of them. So we ought to be going in and doing it through private investment, cooperative private investment, where we will come in and provide the engineering expertise to build out the energy grid using natural gas. We will sell them the gas. We can sell them futures in gas, at a certain price that we could then apply to our deficit reduction, to our debt reduction, I should say, not just deficit, but our debt reduction, but have these cooperative investments, private investments, so it's not government aid. Because government aid changes with administrations. But private investments, that's a 25 to 50 year, a lot of times it's decades commitment.
So let's go back because I apologize, and because I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but I'm trying to keep track of everything that you're putting out here. You said something interesting, and I understand what you're saying there. Not only can we go in and teach and implement and say, hey, you can use natural gas here and give some of these 800 million people that don't have access to any electricity, then start selling them something. Initially give them something, then sell them something. You can start taking care of the world, right, in this way. But I want to go back to one thing and use it as an example, because you said something that I didn't realize was necessarily the case. You said coal, oil, any of these natural resources that we have when it comes to fossil fuels or whatever. You said that they act as a hard asset. That's why it's the question of collateralizing the debt. The way my mind works, again, it's just like a HELOC on a home. So you're saying that we don't even have to actually mine or pull that stuff. We know we have it. We get in place to where we can utilize it and use that in the same. So it's almost like it's equity. We have this equity in our country. Is that?
It's an equity asset, but eventually you're going to have to sell it.
Right.
To meet your debt obligations. And the thing about our debt obligations is most of it is we owe to ourselves. It's in the form of treasuries. We talk about how much foreign debt we have. Out of $34 trillion, we're probably below $5 trillion in foreign-owned debt. Japan owns most of it. It's the largest debt holder of U.S. debt. China would be second. But a lot of it is like Social Security. That is a debt obligation. We know what our unfunded liabilities are going forward. And I know I'm nerding out on people, and they're probably already, their heads are on the pillow wiped out from listening to this stuff, but this is critical to how we correct our course financially and in terms of our foreign relations. And the reason I want to do this through private investment rather than government aid is, like I said, government aid changes with the change in administration. But if you make this cooperative private investment, that means that you'll have somebody from the United States or from a European country or Canada investing in us, not just us. That's why it's a Western Hemisphere alliance. Build out their energy infrastructure, and maybe we're providing the steel pipe and whatever, and the construction, but you got a company down there that's providing the cement
Right.
and concrete and the workers. And China comes in, they're all Chinese workers. They don't hire locals.
Right. Yeah.
Well, you get that done, then you start near sourcing your supply chain because you've got to have a reliable energy grid to support manufacturing. So you start near shoring, and some people call it friend shoring, your supply chain, and then you start developing a middle class in Colombia or in Guatemala or El Salvador or Peru. And when you start developing a middle class, that brings stability. And it also creates new markets. We don't think about this, that there's over 1 billion people live in South and Central America and the Caribbean. That's an enormous market potential for us, and we need to be smart like China's been smart.
Billion people.
Yeah.
Wow.
So, and so it's mutually beneficial. And again, if you're doing it through private investment, what's their main motive? It's a profit motive.
That's right.
So they want to be the most efficient and effective as they can be. Government aid, it's all about influence.
And tell me this, and if I'm wrong on this, please correct me, but government aid is strictly covered by the taxpayer.
Exactly.
Is that correct? Yeah.
Yeah, it adds to our debt.
And this, what you're presenting is covered by what you just mentioned, a profit plan. And if my business, I run a small business, and if my business doesn't succeed, I don't get to go out and ask for more money, or I say if it doesn't succeed. If I don't succeed in using my funds effectively, I don't get to go out and ask for more money.
That's right.
I just tank up and I'm done. But if I succeed at being, faithful with the little things, for lack of a better word, what happens? You grow and you grow and you grow and you get more. And that's what you're presenting with this. It's more than just a government plan. We can help get people energy. We can help maintain our own energy stability. This is truly a plan that brings people in other countries out of poverty without our taxpayers, your members of the 6th District of Alabama, having to dump money into a place that they may never go.
And may actually create new markets where the people who work in the 6th District have a job that pays them well because they're producing a product that can be sold down there to people who can now afford it.
Wow.
Okay? Now, this is not a 4-year plan or an 8-year plan. This is 25 to 50 years. This is what we should have been doing all along. And when I say take a page out of the Chinese playbook, they don't think short term.
You play the long game.
You play the long game, and you do it in a way that it's mutually beneficial. So with government aid, it's generally one-sided. You got to do this, Jared. If you want this check, you got to adopt these DEI.
Yeah.
Now, if we do it where you're running a company in South America and there's a company in Canada or in the United States, y'all get together and you figure out how to build this, and then you move to the next thing, and you move to the next thing, and all of a sudden you start building up these resources down there, and over a 25-year period, you've changed the dynamic.
Yeah.
You don't need China.
And how long have you been working on this, or how long has this been in motion? And you might not be able to tell me, and if not, please don't. But
Over 2 years.
okay, so
really
it's pretty new.
Yeah.
It's just not.
Yeah, but it's just taken off. I can't tell you how many people have been to see me. And my first foray with Sub-Saharan Africa was Speaker Johnson invited me to a lunch with the president of Kenya, and 72% of their debt is to China.
Wow.
Then I went to Rwanda, and we met with President Kagame, and I had an exchange with President Kagame that led their ambassador to tell me they want to meet with me. So next week I'll be meeting with the ambassador from Rwanda. And and part of the problem is that when members of Congress go on these trips, these are very demanding working trips, but we haven't been going to sub-Saharan Africa like we should have been, and we haven't been going to South America. We go east. We spend a lot of time in the Pacific. Obviously, it's a hot zone in terms of our adversarial relationship with China, and particularly over Taiwan. And we got some of our strongest allies there in Japan and Australia. So it's demanded a lot of our attention, and then Europe with what's going on in Ukraine. Mm-hmm. So we've, unfortunately for years, ignored South America to our peril. And I had this breakfast last week that was hosted by the ambassador from El Salvador. And there were at least 25 diplomats there, and one who was not from Latin America is from Portugal, the ambassador from Portugal. And when I meet with these people, I'm not going to be your typical American. I don't come in and tell you this is how it's going to be done. I make a few comments and I'll let them ask questions, because what I've learned over the years through the think tank is if you'll let people talk, they'll tell you how to get whatever it is you need, how to build that relationship. And if you show people respect, they'll work with you. And that's been the secret sauce for me, is that I don't come in as the arrogant guy, the member of Congress. I just come in and say, tell me how things work where you are. And and they're anxious to have a restored relationship with the United States, because they know China's not in their long-term best interest.
Oh, that's great. So there's a lot of stuff there. We don't have time to unpack it all, but why do we not take this a different direction than my mind planned, maybe? Because I do think what you just said is so important. People don't know this. They might know if you've gone around and talked to people about it at Rotary clubs or maybe anywhere in this area, or maybe your colleagues that you work with. And this is kind of a loaded question, but you have colleagues that, people might say, oh, hey, I love that person, because you always see them on the hotspot on Fox News, where they get that YouTube short because they stood up and said, hey, let's get rid of the FBI because they've done all this wrong. This is not that. This is, to me, a lot of times that's symbolism without substance. Would be a term I like to use. This actually, everything you just said, and I know very little about it, this would work. It's at least a plan that seems like we should try to make it work, right? Why don't we hear more about things like this as opposed to the Marjorie Taylor Greenes who are always arguing with somebody that I don't even know what they're arguing about half the time?
Well, I think part of it is I don't really get out and run my mouth about stuff. I think one of the ways
You're talking about like in news media, like the talking heads and all right.
I'm friends with some key people at Fox, and if I could go on if I wanted to, but I choose not to, except when I really think it matters. And I try to, I don't want to be what we call frequent Fox flyers, frequent Fox flyers, is because you start losing the trust of your colleagues. They start to question your motives. Mm-hmm. Do you want to be a media star? Do you want to be, somebody who is serious about their job as a member of Congress? And we've got members that I think have confused being a member of Congress with being in a reality show. They think they're celebrities, and that doesn't work for me. And I don't. You've known me now for 2 years, and I hope you would agree with this. You could count on one hand the number of times I've said something where it could even be construed that I was bragging on myself.
Oh, yeah.
But I will tell you this, and I spoke yesterday in Leeds Chamber of Commerce, and there was a guy there from U.S. Chamber of Commerce. The former parliamentarian of the House now works with them, and he asked him about me, and he said, Palmer's one of the smartest guys in Congress, but he's very quiet. That's how you gain confidence of people, how you get their respect, and you come with good ideas. You don't run out and hold a press conference and say, hey, look at me, I just recommended this, and they're going to do it. Reagan had a thing on his desk that said there's no limit to what you can accomplish if you don't care who gets the credit.
That's right.
I believe that. And so I'm not there to get credit. That's one of the reasons I don't want anybody to call me Congressman Palmer. Just call me Gary. I'm your neighbor. I'm the guy that's in the pew on Sunday morning when you are. But I'm also somebody that understands the times, like the men of Issachar. I understand how late we are, but and that I think can craft some effective plans for addressing this if the world lasts another 100 years. C.S. Lewis said that he lives every day as though it might be the last, but he works as though it might be another 100 years. That's kind of my philosophy. So what I've been able to do is gain people's confidence, and there are other people out there that are perceived to have great influence,
But they don't.
but they don't. And we've got some talented people that are on Fox a lot, and that I do respect. But we've got others that I think have lost sight of what the mission is, and
They're looking for that spotlight.
and they don't understand how important it is to work as a team.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of Americans, especially younger generations, never really had history, never really learned history, never really learned civics. But as I explained to some folks today that I had a meeting with, is our system is designed to be frustratingly slow. It's one of the most inefficient government systems ever designed, and that's great, because efficient government is a government that could really do great harm to you.
That's right, yeah.
And so we have three separate branches with defined roles, and we've lost that. We now have the executive branch taking over the authority of Congress and making laws through executive orders, through regulations, through rules and guidance. Give you an example. We had the administrator of the EPA in a hearing. His name's Michael Reagan, and I said, Administrator Reagan, does the EPA make law? He said, no, sir, only Congress can make law. I said, well, I appreciate that. So if someone violates one of your regulations or rules or guidance, can they be charged with a criminal offense, jailed or fined? And he said, well, yes. And I said, well, how's that different from a law? He said, well, Congress gives us that authority. And I said, Mr. Reagan, I can assure you that some of the rules and regulations that the EPA has imposed, particularly lately, were not approved by Congress. Now, there's a Supreme Court case that will be, the decision will be handed down the next 2 weeks by the end of June, called the Loper case, that I think is going to be one of the most important cases maybe in our history for restoring Article I authority back to Congress. Because when you have nameless, faceless bureaucrats in these administrations making all these rules that you have to live under, and if you don't, you could go to jail or you could be hit with a huge fine, that's denying you representative government.
That's right, yeah.
Because you don't vote for those people.
That's right.
This decision could send that lawmaking authority back to Congress so that you can hold me accountable for what I vote for or don't vote for.
The way it should be to begin with, right?
Absolutely, the way it
So,
should be.
So do you think, in that's a great example, what you just mentioned with the EPA, but do you think the bureaucracy that exists now is really the bigger problem? A lot of people say, Congress is messing up, Senate's messing up, the president's these are all elected officials. They're the ones we see on Fox, or you're the one that I see when it's time for election. But you just mentioned nameless, faceless people. A lot of times, and this is what I've learned just from being a SEAL and now being involved a little bit in politics, knowing guys, that bureaucracy in the middle seems to be the thing that keeps the politician from getting the information that they need from the guys on the ground, or the guys on the ground from getting the stuff that they need from the politician, whether it's a war overseas or the voter here in 6th District of Alabama. Would you see, is that true? Do you believe that's true?
Absolutely. The administrative state is the deep state. It's not Congress. My first 3 terms in Congress, there were 109 Republicans that did not lose an election. They just decided to leave Congress for one reason or another. That's half a majority.
Wow.
You can't run any kind of business when you have that kind of turnover.
Yeah.
And the other thing is my first 3 months in Congress, I was on the Budget Committee, on the Space Science and Technology Committee, and on the Oversight Committee. And again, as your listeners have probably figured out, I'm a complete nerd, but I love the Budget Committee. I knew that's where you learn where everything is.
And God bless you on that.
And so I was on budget, and the way the structure is, you have all of these executive branches. You've got the EPA, you've got the Department of Energy, Labor, all that stuff, and you've got people over there that have been there 20, 30 years. And if you got elected, they look at you and think, I was here before you got here, and I'll be here when you leave, because the turnover is a lot greater than people think. And then on the congressional side, you have your congressional staff, but each house has standing committees, and they're staffed by people who are permanent staff. They're there whether you're there or not. And so I was on the Budget Committee, and on my staff, I have a staff member who just works on budget. His name was Johnny Moyer. And I called Johnny in, and I just found out we were sending out $150 billion a year in improper payments, which was borrowed money we're paying interest on to send out improperly. And there was a report that came out that at that time, when I first got elected, we had a self-imposed ban on exporting crude oil that had been imposed since the 1970s in the energy crisis. And we're floating on oil. And so this report said that if we repeal that ban and started exporting crude oil over a 15-year period, it would generate $1.3 trillion in new government revenues. So I called Johnny in. I said, I want you to go down to the Budget Committee and tell them I want to get it into the budget to take into account cutting improper payments and opening up our oil exports. So he goes down, he comes back, and I said, what did they tell you? He said he won't do it. And I said, wait a minute. He said he can't do it or he shouldn't do it. He said, no, sir. He said he will not do it. I said, Johnny, go down there and tell him that I said he didn't get elected. And Johnny's eyes got big, and he said, you want me to do that? I said, Johnny, I want you to go down there right now. I don't care if he's in a meeting. I don't care what he's doing. You walk in his office, you walk up to him, and you tell him I sent you to tell him he did not get elected. And Johnny did. You know what the guy did?
What did he do?
He put it in the budget. About a few weeks later, the staff director who runs the Republican staff on the Budget Committee called our staffers in, the ones who worked for the different members of Congress who were on the Budget Committee, called them in, told them that their job was to do what he told them to do, to make sure their bosses did what he told them to do. And one young woman with some backbone said, well, sir, each one of our bosses were elected in districts of over 700,000 people, and they're here to represent them, not you. He slammed his fist on the table, chewed her out in front of everybody. We got him fired. That's what's got to change. Mm-hmm. I think we've got to reevaluate all these federal agencies, what we need and don't need. Jared, there's still funding sitting in agency accounts for programs that don't exist anymore.
Wow.
It's unbelievable what we've allowed to happen, and it's not going to change if we keep electing people who just go along to get along, but it's not going to change if you just have people whose whole deal is social media.
Yeah, they're celebrities, or they want to be celebrities. Yeah.
You've got to have a plan to get this done, and I think that's what Trump brings to the table. I think that's why he'll get reelected. And I think we've got a great chance to not only hold the majority in the House, but to increase it and to get the majority in the Senate. And I've told Speaker Johnson, as you know, I'm part of leadership. So we have a leadership meeting when we the first day we're back in each week. And I told our guys, we basically have 20, 22 months to get the country turned around. And people say, well, why just 20 or 22 months? Trump's going to be there 4 years. Well, he will be in his second term, and historically, the midterm election of a second-term president, the majority party generally loses, his party generally loses seats. But even when they don't, they always lose momentum. Mm-hmm. So we've got to create that first 10 months it's got to be pedal to the metal, get things done to give us momentum in that next 10 months. And then hopefully the American public will see what we've done, and they'll give us the opportunity to carry that over into the second half of Trump's second term.
And you think, from what you see, this November we could easily, when I say we, I'm talking about as conservatives, as Republicans, have the House, the Senate, and the presidency, right, the executive branch. We could have all three of those working together to push forward ideas like the Western Hemisphere Alliance and things like that to get us back on track. You don't think it's so far gone that even if we did get all three of those, we're not so far gone that we can't reset and make it back on track? You don't think the ship's completely sunk yet?
I can't lay out all that we're talking about, but I can tell you this. In Trump's first term, he hired a lot of smart people who had no clue how to work with Congress. So it took us 8 or 10 months just to get things going in the right direction. And we had a health care plan that McCain killed. We didn't do a good job. The Trump administration wasn't prepared for this. That's not going to be the case this time. A lot of stuff that needs to be done will be prepared the day he walks through the door.
That's great.
And that's what we got to do. I'm doing everything I can to be supportive. There are other people behind the scenes that I think that agree with me that it's not who gets credit, it's who gets the job done. And he's in much better position with much better people. Not on a character level, just in terms of knowing what to do and how to do it. And that's the key. And I think with Mike Johnson as Speaker, we'll have things teed up. There's certain procedural things that we'll have to do that are too boring to talk about in a podcast, but I think we know how to get some things done that will be absolute game changers. And I'm ready to get to it. That's why I ran again. I'm 70 years old, and I've told people I don't want to be there till I'm drooling in my oatmeal. I want to get things done, and I think this is our chance, Jared. This is the most in our history, the most important election ever, and I know you hear that at every election. And I think after 4 years of Biden, people have got to agree how important that election was, and we messed it up. And what I would say, a lot of your audience are evangelicals. About 30% of the evangelicals, maybe higher, are not even coming out to vote. And you got a lot of people worried about the possibility of having an election stolen. Well, when you don't show up, it's easy to steal it.
That's right.
So you've got to show up. And if you show up in the numbers that you should, they can't steal it because the numbers won't work for them.
That's right.
So we've got to get people to get out. And they have a duty. They think it's all on us or on you, you guys who've served in our military. But every person who lives in this country as a citizen has a duty and responsibility. I take people on nighttime tours. I don't think you've done one yet.
No, sir.
But I stand them in front of one of the murals and talk about, it's the signing of the Constitution. And I love doing this with college and high school kids. And I say, what's that first line of the Constitution say? And most of them get it right. I say, we the people of the United States in order to form and they'll finish it, more perfect union. And I said, why didn't they just say perfect? It's because our founders understood the human condition, that we're not perfect people and we're going to make mistakes. And when they said a more perfect union, that's not just a clarifying statement. It's a statement that imposes a responsibility on each succeeding generation. And one of the things that I tell these kids is, look, smart people learn from their mistakes, but brilliant people learn from other people's mistakes. That's why you study history, so you don't do the same dumb things over and over. And that's what I want to get across to evangelicals and other people who are sitting on the sideline. You have as much responsibility for the future of this country as I do, or as you do. You wrote the country a blank check, put your life on the line. That's not what I'm doing, but I am putting my reputation and the future of my family on the line to try to correct our course. But you couldn't do what you're doing, I couldn't do what I'm doing if other people didn't step up and do what they're supposed to do.
That's right.
So I'm hoping that people are going to wake up. I'm praying earnestly for a great awakening, because what we need is a spiritual awakening that will cause us to embrace our responsibilities as, first of all, I think as Christians, but fundamentally just as citizens of the United States, and understand this enormous gift that we've been given, that we get to choose who leads us. And I mean, in our primaries, you got 20% turnouts or less. And in Alabama, that's generally the election. That means that if somebody gets 10% plus one, that's half of that 20% plus one, they're going to determine who represents the other 90%.
That's right. That's right. And you know, it's Frederick Douglass said, it's funny you're saying this, Frederick Douglass said that our freedom is secured in 3 boxes, right? The ballot box, the jury box, and the cartridge box. So we have our elections, and you're talking about that, and we have our court systems. And people want to talk about all the elections stolen, maybe they cheat, but if you vote in numbers enough, they can't cheat. We know that. If the numbers get out to vote, you can't out-cheat the numbers of people that if everybody got out and voted. The jury or the court systems we have, the jury box, our court systems, although broken in some areas and in some ways, they still hold true for the most part. It seems to me like they still hold true. I believe that. But that final option is the cartridge box, right? And most people don't realize, Frederick Douglass realized this. Of course, he helped Abraham Lincoln, the Civil War, freeing the slaves, all that stuff. But he understood what it meant. And a lot of people don't understand what the cartridge box actually means. And I know for me personally, that's not something I want my kids dealing with, because I've dealt with it. I've done it overseas, Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Africa, all the places that we've gone, at least since I started military service. I've seen what that looks like, and I think what you're saying is vitally important for people to understand. You do not want it talks about a civil war and all this stuff. You don't want that. You don't want your children experiencing that. You don't want to experience that yourselves. And the only way we keep from doing that is by casting your vote. And if you're a Christian, casting the vote that you believe God is telling you to cast, but casting your vote and making sure that you take the responsibility, as you put it, that's on you as we the people, right? Because you're the elected mouthpiece of the people, at least of the 6th District of Alabama. And so it would be important if I took time to actually go out and fill your name in on a ballot if I believe that you're that mouthpiece I need to have. So I appreciate you saying it, because that is probably the most important thing that we have missed, I think, over the last, in my lifetime. My generation has missed it. So, well, as we wrap this up, and I want to bring you back as we get closer to the election, maybe to talk more specifically about your election. That's what I would prefer to do at that point in time. I know right now you're in an election, but it's kind of got a little bit of a downtime right now, I would hope. After the primary, you're still out working, doing stuff in Congress.
There's no downtime.
There's never downtime? Yeah. But as we get closer, talk more about what you're dealing with, the Democrat candidate that you're facing. Again, anything could happen, and I know you're going to go out and work as if you're going to lose, but it's very unlikely that you'll lose the 6th District. But I do want you to talk about your campaign and those things that are going on as we get closer to the fall. Is there anything you'd like to leave the listeners with on what we've discussed? You've blown my mind with, and I already knew some of it, just with the Western Hemisphere Alliance and the energy and the stuff that we have access to. I think that some of the plans you are working on are phenomenal, and I pray and hope that we can continue to have that. But do you have anything else that you want to leave the listeners with?
Just don't lose hope. I believe in prayer, but I remind people there are a lot of people willing to pray, and I cannot overemphasize the importance of prayer. There's a group of us. Our schedule is either Monday, Thursday, or Tuesday, Friday. On the days we're flying home, there are a group of us that meets to pray over Mike Johnson, the Speaker. I've been involved in Washington since 1991, and I've never known of a time when that happened, where the Speaker wants people to come in and pray with him. And so we've got a leader in the House that churches have been wanting for decades. And the only way he'll remain as Speaker is if we go out and hold the majority in the House. That means you got to vote. That means you got to give money. That means you might need to give some time, go out and knock on some doors, go to some of these other states where we need people to go door to door. But don't lose hope. The God has seen worse, believe it or not.
yeah.
And he's still in charge, and I believe he answers prayers. So one thing that I tell people is it's one thing to pray, but there's also a time you got to act. And if you remember in Exodus, when the children of Israel were at the shore of the Red Sea, and they're all crying out to God, because they see the Egyptian army about to come down on them. They're all crying out. And I'm paraphrasing, but it's like God said to Moses, "What are you doing? Get up, head to the shore." And then he parts the water. There's a time when you got to get up off your knees and you got to act. And you got to trust that God's going to answer your prayers and bless your action. And that's what it means to get involved. That's getting up and getting involved and trusting that God is going to bring the outcome that He's going to bless. But you can't stay locked in your house watching Fox News or what it is you're watching. This is a form of government that requires the people to be involved. It's the only way it'll work.
Absolutely. Well, with that being said, do you mind closing us in prayer?
I'll be happy to. Heavenly Father, I thank you for this opportunity to talk with Jared and to be a part of his podcast. And I just pray the people that are watching, Lord, that this is ministered to them in some way that's beneficial, but not for my benefit, Lord, but for the benefit of the country and for your glory and to the glory of the church. I think of people in the past, Lord, that have stepped forward and led in very difficult circumstances. I think of William Wilberforce leading the effort to end slavery in England and how discouraged he would become at times. And he had a mentor who wrote him and told him not to be discouraged, Lord, that if you were with him, that who could be against him? And that was John Wesley. And another mentor told him that be believed that he was raised up for the good of the country, for the good of the church, and to your glory. And that was John Newton, who wrote Amazing Grace. We need people like that, Father. But even in that case, there were people surrounding him, praying for him, supporting him, and helping in that cause. And that's what we need, Father. We need a great awakening. We need a massive revival, Lord, that will sweep from east to west, from north to south across this nation, that will not only bless this nation, but bless the world. And so, Lord, we're just trusting this to you, that in this late hour, that, Father, you're going before us, that you're watching over us by day and by night, and are going out and are coming in. And that, Father, you will bring a blessing upon our country. And we just humbly come before you now and ask for that, trusting in your providential will, Lord, in your love and tender mercies for us as individuals and for our families, for our state and nation. We pray it in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, Mr. Palmer, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you for having me on.
Yes, sir.